Hello and welcome. If this is your first time with us, thank you for stopping by. You're listening to Choose to Endure, the show dedicated to the back of the pack runners, where we share stories, interviews, gear, and training tips specific to the tail-end heroes of the ultra universe. If you haven't had a moment to do so yet, please consider heading over to your favorite podcast app, maybe even the one you're listening on right now, hit follow, rate the show, and if you're on Apple, maybe even leave a short review too. My name is Richard Gleave. I've been running ultras since 2017. I have taken on and finished numerous distances, all the way up through 220 miles, and I am unashamedly a member of the back of the pack, just like you are. Here in the studio with me today, I am honored to welcome LaCroix and Scott Weidenbacher. Now, Kurt and Scott are no strangers to ultra running. A quick glance at their ultra sign-up history shows Kurt finishing Children of the Cane 100-miler in addition to a few other races, and Scott has previously completed the Wildcat Ultras 100-miler prior to both of them taking on the race which they're here to talk with us about today, which is the Red Dirt Ultra 100-mile race over in Louisiana, which they completed this past February. We're hopefully going to learn a little bit about the race itself. We're going to hear the story of how the guys' race went a few weeks back. And lastly, discover why you may or may not want to consider adding this event to your 2025 calendar. So stick with us. We're going to be right back after this.
Discover raw, inspiring stories from runners who've been right where you are. This is the Choose to Endure Ultra Running Podcast with your host.
He's English, not Australian.
Richard Gleave.
So, Kurt and Scott, welcome to the show. Fantastic to have you on. It's been a short while since your run. I hope you're both rested up and healing well at this point. How are you guys feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good.
I'm feeling good. I took a couple weeks off with some minor knee pain. Started back April 1st, back on the road.
Oh, man, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I would take a race with minor knee pain afterwards at this age, for sure.
Right.
Kurt, how about you?
A little different than Scott. Literally, I think we got back from the race and probably 3 days later, I was back out. I've put in a lot of miles, and although the race was painful and it hurt, I rebounded really quick and was able to get back on the road.
Do you think, is it just because you put in the miles in advance, you feel like your body just knows how to recover from that? Or was there something specific you were doing in the training you think that helped from that regard?
I do think the volume that I put in definitely helped in that aspect. I get to the point where I want to go out and get exhausted every weekend. And it might not just be, from running. It might be doing just my everyday tasks. Like I'll get up in the morning, go run 30 miles. And then I'm like, oh, crud, I got to cut the grass, and I got to do this, got to wash the cars. So just going out there and trying to get totally exhausted in a day, I think has definitely helped in that recovery phase to where I was able to step back in and start, loading on miles right away.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's awesome. That's a great lesson for everybody out there too. Get in some miles, and active recovery and active training in advance can really assist. Yep. I think, though, so we're talking Red Dirt Ultra here, specifically the 100-miler. Maybe that's where we should start.
Sure.
If I can chuck it over to you guys, give us an overview of the race itself for anybody listening that might not be familiar with that particular event. Is it a point-to-point? Is it time, loop? Whereabouts does this race take place? Kind of paint the picture, if you will, of what is the Red Dirt Ultra 100?
I'll say a little something, and then I'm going to give it over. I'll let Scott kind of finish.
Yeah.
So it is here. It is I'm not going to say it's a local race to Scott or I, but it is within our state. I'm within a 4-mile drive. Scott's a little further, but we didn't know a whole lot about it. Scott knew more about it than I did because he had talked to some people who had done it. So I'll kick it over to Scott, and he can kind of tell you what he had heard about the race first.
Sure.
Yeah, I had talked to. We had just finished another race at the end of last year, and we were looking for another race to do. I had some acquaintances that I had run, over the years with that had done the Red Dirt Ultra. They ran and raved about how good of a course it was, how well maintained the aid stations were. It was really a runner friendly with aid stations and help all along the course. So that's kind of how I had that one on the calendar, kind of looking at it. When we decided we wanted to do that race, we really started kind of diving in and looking at the schematics of it. It was a 16-mile loop.
Okay.
So we had multiple loops to do.
All right, I'm gonna kill him right there. So it wasn't a 16-mile loop. Maybe in his brain it was, Richard, but it was actually a 33.3333 mile loop.
Oh, wait, you are correct. You see, it's been so long I already forgot. I was hoping it was 16. Kurt is absolutely correct.
It's that compartmentalization, right? Like, to me, it was only 16.
To me, it felt like 900-mile loops, but that's...
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was another race we did some years back, and it was a 16-mile loop. So he's correct, 33-mile loop, which was a really, a long loop.
That's a big loop, yeah.
I underestimated the elevation for sure. There was definitely some elevation gain and loss during that race. But as far as the setup and what I had heard about the race, people were spot on. The aid stations were very well maintained. The course could have been marked, I think, a little bit better. And Kurt, you could probably speak to that as well. A little bit better, it probably could have been marked, especially for nighttime.
Mm.
But all in all, we drew some pretty good weather. Although it was cold, it was pretty good weather. We didn't have to worry about the sun beating down or too hot. Aid stations were full. They had hot food. They had cold food. They had electrolytes. Everything you would really look for at a race as a runner, they had at that location.
So yeah, Richard, is total cutoff time of 33 hours for this one. Like Scott was corrected already. See, I'm gonna get my jabs in. That was 33. Yeah, 33 mile loop. I didn't know anything about the race. I mean, I've heard about it. I know people who have done it, but I've never asked in detail because it wasn't in my consideration. I think when Scott started talking about it, what got me interested in it is all of the training block leading up to the race would be in fair weather for us here. I mean, we're both Scott's in Pensacola, Florida, hot. I'm in South Louisiana, hot. So putting in a lot of miles during the summer, it just takes a big toll on you. It wears you out. Whereas when you start training in South Louisiana and Pensacola in October, November, December, it's relatively mild. And you can put in a bunch of chunks of miles and recover quicker and can do it. So that kind of piqued my interest because I'm like, okay, I can put in a lot of chunks of miles. I mean, I can go out and run. I could take a month straight and I could take every weekend and I could go, hey, I can run 26 on Saturday and I can go run 10 on Sunday. It was that kind of deal because it wasn't that hot and it was easier to recover for the training. I had no idea how hilly and how much terrain and ups and downs this course had until when we got out there, we had some ideas of what kind of pacing we were going to try to attempt and everything. And we had a seasoned veteran who had actually, I think I don't know if he did it once or twice, but he came in third. So relatively fast guy. And Scott and I kind of were like, oh yeah, we're gonna 15-minute pace and everything. And he just goes, okay, man, you guys just stay to the keep your nose down and keep at it. He knew, and he didn't tell us.
Yeah, he knew. Yep.
Excellent. That's kind of fun that he sort of let you at it and kind of let you go for it without giving you the heads up.
Yeah, after that first loop, we knew.
Well,
we knew quick. We knew quick too.
Absolutely. So let's talk race strategy for a minute. It looks like, as I look at Ultra Signup, it looks like you guys ultimately ended up finishing together.
Yep.
Was that the plan? And if that was the plan, how did? Because it's tough to go through. I think it took 31 hours if I read the report correct. I mean, it's tough to stay together actively for 31 hours with another person through all the ebbs and flows of a race into and out of aid stations and so on. So was that the plan? Did you intend to stick together the whole way from the outset? And if so, how did you make that happen?
Kurt, I'll start, then you can jump in. So a little bit of backstory. So Kurt and I lived around the corner from each other for a bunch of years, and we worked together in Louisiana. I moved to Pensacola from Baton Rouge, so I'm very familiar with Kurt and where he ran, and we would run every morning together we probably did it for a couple of years before we moved. So pace wise, we would train at the same pace. We had a different pace if we're training for a marathon or for an ultra. So we would train at the same pace, and we kind of kept the same pace training. We kept the same training schedule. So even when I moved to Pensacola, if I look at Kurt's run and Kurt looks at my run, we're within, 15 seconds each mile of where each other's are. That's kind of how we're training together. Our goal when we started was, we're going to stick together. We're going to keep each other motivated. You got peaks and valleys, as you know.
Yeah.
So one person is peaking, the other person might be in a little lull or kind of down themselves. So it's kind of, like you said, the ebbs and flow of the racing. We kind of keep each other going, keep each other motivated. Just kind of when I need it, Kurt's there to pull me, and when Kurt needs it, I'm there to pull him. So our strategy was to start out and to finish and cross that line together. Yep.
So this all kind of, Richard, this all kind of stems back. I did I completed my first one in 2020. It's a local race here, no longer running as of right now. But when I did that one, Scott wasn't, he had done some runs and he had done this actual same race, but in a shorter distance. So he had seen the course before.
Okay.
He had seen the course before that I did. But on that one, that was kind of like that was my solo mission. And I think you asked about our bio and stuff like that. And I kicked it back to, a lot of my running stuff, and what keeps me going forward is it's something my dad and I used to do together. And that's how we bonded. But fast forward, Scott had not done 100 yet, and he had a local race in his backyard called Wildcat Ultras. And same deal, he had run the course several times. He knew what it was all about. I had no idea what it was about. All I, told him, I said, I'm either going to come pace you, or I'm going to come run it. Well, I got into a point there where I was having a great training session through the summer, Richard, and it was just a great time. I was feeling good. I had race aspirations. I had goals. I was going to go out there and I was going to knock this race out in 24 hours. Well, lo and behold, I got humbled really quickly. I only made it. The running ultras will do it to you real quick. So I got humbled, and I didn't make it. I only made it through 50 miles. But Scott we had another friend out there, and those two got through that race. I actually came back out the next morning, even after I left the course. I came back out the next morning and did a few loops with Scott, and let him finish on his own with his wife. But I think when I saw that camaraderie between Scott and the other guy, his name is Jeremy, I think at that point, that's when I made my decision that I guess I need to do these with somebody and not try to act like that I am some guy who's going to go out there and beat a time. I think every race for me going forward, my attitude is I'm there for one thing, and that's to start, and it's to finish and beat the time. Beat the cutoff time. So that's what I rate, and from now on, that's what I'm going to race against. And so when Scott and I started talking about red dirt, I mean, I was bitter still. I just come off a race that I DNF'd, and I was bitter, and I needed to win. I think at one point in time, I think Scott and I were on the second loop, and I told him, I said, "This is it for me, dude." I said, if I don't finish this, I said, nothing else matters at this point. Now that's one cool thing about Ultra too that I like, Richard. When you're out there, nothing else matters except for that. And I think at that point in time, knowing that I had somebody there who was going to see the thing through with me the whole way, it just gives you that extra boost of confidence, and it just cleared the way. We had some struggles along the way, and we'll get into it, but I think having that other person there, it's different than a pacer, right? A pacer's cool, and you're going to pick a pacer up, and they're going to give you a little shot in the arm and everything. But knowing that, hey, sometimes pacers don't show up, right? And I've had the guy, I've had a pacer, hey, I'll be there, and he didn't show up, and then I'm like, oh gosh, now you're pulling people from who wants to come run, knowing that I had a built-in person that wasn't going to leave, and there was a lot of times there when he was dragging me along, and I was glad to have it, but it was never a doubt that we weren't going to finish together. That's kind of how this whole thing started, and we do have another one coming up. I'm going to get my redemption at that Wildcat race in August. So
Brilliant.
That's where we are right now.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting dichotomy there with okay, you could have a pacer and you can run with somebody, and effectively both of them you end up with a person running with you, but the two can be really different experience within the race.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like, especially when you've had somebody with you for the whole race, like you guys are running together right from the outset, where a pacer can step in, can step out. They're kind of a little more, I mean, granted, they're there to get you to the finish. That's part of their job, but you know, they're a little bit more detached from it, maybe. I don't know, but
they're not as invested. I feel like, you know, you pick the pacer up either when it gets dark or usually around the 50-mile mark. By that time, you know, Kurt and I have already spent 12 hours together, 13 hours together, and we're so invested at that point that, you know, if our pacer doesn't show up or something happens and they get sick and can't come, we're still there and we're halfway through.
I think I told Scott when we were when we were finishing or wherever we were on that race, I said the only thing that matters is me or you and I finishing this thing. I said I could get fired from my job on Monday. I don't care. I don't care as long as I finish this race. That was it.
Well, you know, and it's funny. I was just talking with somebody about that actually, about how interesting and refreshing it is to run these types of races, because everything gets stripped away and all you're left with really is sort of eat, drink, and to some degree sleep, potentially. Those really fast become the three things you're left with in life and your sole focus for however long it is until you're done with that race. I just thought it was really interesting how fast everything else drops away. And you get totally focused on this one goal that you're trying to do, and the three big ones: eat, drink, and the race I was doing was a 200 miler. So for me,
sleep.
You know, sleep.
Yep.
But and that's there as well to some degree in a 100 miler. But yeah, really eat and drink are the two big ones, whatever you're doing. Anyway, but yeah, I agree. I think it's really interesting how fast the rest of the world falls apart when that's your sole focus. I mean, you get 30 miles in, 40 miles in, and everything else is gone. Very cool. So we talked about reflecting, and I do think it's important to reflect back on the race. So I definitely wanted to ask you, because we're starting to get into that side of the conversation too. So what went well for you guys during the race? What were some things that you thought afterwards, looking back, yeah, we actually did pretty good there?
I think we stayed once you get that dose of reality in the arm of really what the trail is. I think we stayed pretty well on our plan. And, you know, our plan originally was, like I said, three loops. I think our original plan, what was it, Scott? 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours?
Yep, 8,
was
9,
our plan.
10.
Okay. And I think we ended up going 9, 10, 11, right? Is that, I'm not mathing out real quick, but it was thereabouts, something like that. So I think what we did well, Richard, is once we saw what we were up against, we adjusted and we nailed it and we stayed on it.
Yep.
Scott, how about you? What are you thinking on what went well?
I think the same thing. I think we didn't get flustered when we saw the elevation and you know, kind of trail the first loop, and then second loop was the nighttime trail. We knew we had another loop and a half at night in the dark. You know, we didn't get flustered. We knew what it was. We slowed our pace just a little bit. I think both of us did a really great job at taking in calories and staying hydrated. You know, and I think the calories, you know, when I saw Kurt eat something, I would try and eat something. I'm sure it was the same thing for him. And we stayed on the calories, and, you know, we didn't get flustered. Like I said, there were some parts where we would come up to, you know, a little creek or a little dip in the ground, and we're like, I don't remember this from last time. It looks steeper. You know, what do we do?
They always get steeper, don't they?
Things look different at 2 a.m.
I'm like, did we even cross this path last time? But, you know, we didn't let anything bother us. We just went with the flow. We stayed with our routine, and that's kind of how we managed. Yeah.
So you guys have mentioned the elevation once or twice. Was it like, what was the elevation of the of that route? Do you remember? Was it obviously more than you expected, I would imagine.
Yeah,
for sure.
A lot of it is an equestrian trail, so horse trails, and you know, horses can step up stuff a lot easier than us humans can.
Right.
So there was some, not so much the gradual elevation. I think I had a nickname for it. I think I was calling it the Quad Buster, I mean, ups are one thing, downs are another. And downs when you get fatigued, are so hard to control, especially when they're steep. And I'm just sitting here going, either I'm going to twist an ankle, I'm going to bust my butt. And I'm like, don't step in a rut, especially when you're going down. Because, hey, look, you can't see, you can't really tell from our pictures right here, our builds. But I weigh a little more than Scott does. Just by a bit.
Is he allowed to say that, Scott? I don't know.
If we stand next to each other, we look a little different. I'm 6'3", and he's
a little bit different.
I'm 6'3", 210, and he's probably 5'9", 5'10", and weighs 100.
5'8", 145.
So,
wow.
Hey, but when you're going uphill, you can't tell.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, let's flip the coin. So things that went well, fantastic. What were some of the things that didn't go quite so well? And I know there's always some in these races. What were some of the challenges that you guys faced during the race? And were there any surprises that you hadn't anticipated beforehand, even with the advance notice you'd had from Jeremy, was it?
I think we had some... I'll let Scott talk about his gear challenges with headlamps and stuff, but...
Well, that sounds interesting.
I think for me, I fell more times than I don't ever try to think I'm not going to fall, especially on courses that have a lot of roots, and especially when at night. I just, your gait changes and you don't pick your feet up as much, and I catch a root here and there, and I try to keep my balance, but I think I fell a few more times than I did. And I had one bad fall too in one of the creek beds that really hurt. And that was the only lagging injury I had. Once that healed, I think I didn't ever get an x-ray on my femur, but if it was fractured, it might've been. I had a really, really deep bruise down to my femur that really hurt. But good thing that didn't happen till Scott, was that mile like 89-ish or something like that. So it didn't happen.
Yeah, close to the end for sure. Yeah.
At that point, it wouldn't have mattered. I think I probably could have. I don't say probably. I would have finished if it was broken. It would have had to been in 2 for me not to finish. But Scott did have some gear issues.
I have had over my past probably 3 races and even training sessions for that matter. I've had the worst luck with headlamps.
Headlamps. Okay. Yeah.
I thought I brought 2. Apparently I only brought 1. I had a spare battery. It died the first loop. It was 100% charged. Died on the first time I turned it on, an hour after it got dark. I had a spare battery. Couldn't find it. But the whole time it was in my pack.
Yes.
Oh man, that's worse.
It was. Yeah. I was actually offering at the aid stations. I was going to buy someone or Venmo them money if they had a headlamp I could have. And at one of the aid stations, one of the young guys working it had a little bitty, like a little square flashlight. So he's like, man, just take it. So it was better than nothing, but it didn't give off like a light, like a headlamp does. It was just a light, just a little bitty lamp.
Richard's like a lantern. It was horrible. So we're running side by side, and he's got this thing clipped on his bag, and I'm like, it's just beaming in my eyes. If I turn to talk to him, I was like, can you turn that thing off?
Yeah. And the whole time, the spare battery was in my pack that I was carrying with me. It was all the way at the bottom.
When he got home, he's like, I found my battery. It was in my bag at the bottom.
In my bag.
I was like,
yeah.
The headlamp is one of my biggest fears when I'm out running. I have so many extra batteries for a headlamp, and I've never needed one yet.
Scott does.
Yep. But yes.
Yep.
Now, but that just reiterates my fear right there. Like I'm going to go back and double and triple check them and put them somewhere I can see them at all times.
I think I'm going to start bringing 4 headlamps with me every time I have a run now.
Yeah,
we started. You look, your brain wanders and everything, and I was like, "Hey, what is that song? What was it? The Gym Blossoms, I think it was. We can drive it home with one headlight or one headlamp, and that's what we felt like there. I was just like." Scott, just stay right to my side. We'll just go like this. And
right.
Yeah. When you start leeching off the people in front, behind, or next to you.
What gets it worse is then I'm like, oh wait, I think mine's getting dimmer too now. I was like, we're gonna be in trouble here.
Yeah.
We made it through though. We made it. We got back to the main aid station in time. I had a spare headlamp, and so did he. So crisis averted.
Yeah. averted.
Other gear, other things that went. I know for me that was a shoe changing course for me. You got wet you got your feet.
Right.
You saw stuff wet every loop. So every time we hit the main aid station, I mean, you know how it is, Richard. Changing socks and shoes, especially when it's 22 degrees out there, you're already cold and wet.
Oh,
you're cold.
gosh.
You're cold and wet, and it's just tough. We get help, but man, my toes are so jacked up, and if I move them one way, they'll cramp up and everything. And I think just the fact that having to change the shoes so my feet didn't get so destroyed was the main thing. I still have just popped up. I sent Scott a picture the other day. I just popped off my last toenail the other day.
Oh, brilliant. Excellent.
And just to piggyback on what Kurt said, I think gear in general was kind of a challenge for that race, all the way down to our attire. Like, it was cold. Yeah. We had at one point I had a hoodie with a quarter zip jacket under it, and we had beanie caps on. It was cold. It was 22 at night, and the wind was blowing. And when you left 33-mile loop, when you left for that loop, if you didn't have it with you, you weren't getting it for 8 hours or 9 hours.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
I've had a few races like that here in Texas. I think people underestimate, especially if you come from out of state, you underestimate it can get pretty cold.
Yep.
Even though we're down in the south here, yes, it can. And with a wind blowing, and if you happen to get any kind of wet from rain or your feet from a stream, it can get pretty cagey.
Yeah, it was cold.
Quick.
It was cold.
One of my biggest fears for this race was my hands. I have a slight case of Raynaud's.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
And so whenever the deal, then it doesn't matter. You can wrap them till the day's long.
Yep.
Once they lose that circulation. So I did not have that problem at all this race, and this was the first cold race, Richard, that I did implement heated gloves. So that was extra gear that I had to carry and extra batteries. But wow, that was a difference maker in my hands for sure. And one of the things that does for me is that keeps all the blood circulating properly in the body. And once the blood's circulating, keeps the heart rate right. I did not have any issues with that. So that was the first time I used those things all the way through. So
that's cool.
I used them for a full 16-hour cycle is what I got. I got out of 2 sets of batteries.
Okay. Is that 2 independent sets? So you had to charge one, charge it back up, and go again. Do they give you an extra set of batteries on those?
The ones I bought came with one set of batteries, and then I bought an extra set. I probably could have went with a third set just to be super comfy. But oh no! So I had my regular gloves on, and then I went into the heated gloves too, and hot hands as well. So I was covered all.
And you're just going all out.
I took them off and they were on fire. I was on fire. I felt like
That's a big challenge, though. I know I have the same deal. It can be 40 degrees. It can be 45 degrees. My hands go kind of purple and then they go white, and I lose all feeling. It's a real thing, and it's really difficult. Any kind of wind.
Yeah, when you get into aid stations, you're trying to eat something or open, and I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, you're trying to open a bottle or trying to undo a gel or a packet of those fruit snacks or something is really difficult when your hands don't.
Heated gloves, though.
Quite under the radar challenger.
I always heard David Goggins talk about it, and I was like, you know what? I need to get some of these things. I'm tired of messing around with this. And I bought those things, and Scott came in town 4 weeks before the race, and we were going to do I don't know what, Scott, 40 miles or what? I think we did 43 miles or whatever it was, train and run. It was perfect. That's when I used the gloves the first time, and I'm like, I may be onto something here. I
like it. Now, earlier on, you guys talked about course markings too, and how those might have been improved, shall we say, potentially, especially at night. What's the story behind that?
We're no Magellans over here, and
no, I'm not very good with directions to start with. So I was kind of following Kurt's lead, and I would have been lost in a second. But there were, it's nighttime, it's dark, you're under trees, it's really hard to see. There were little contractor flags, and I felt like they could have had more flags out, but definitely some type of reflective or reflection on the flags.
Oh, right.
They were little plain orange flags, and they were
just
tucked
regular.
And they were tucked so far down that there were so many leaves on the course. It was really hard to see from flag to flag where to go.
I think what got them, Richard, is Originally, when they marked the course on Friday, I think it was Thursday, Friday is when they marked. It wasn't as windy. That day, I think it was 14-mile-an-hour winds, gusts to 25. Now, when you're in the forest, you don't get it, right?
Okay.
But there's sections that we're getting it. And I think some of those sections, their flags might have gotten spun. Some of them did have, and at nighttime is where it's important, right? Because you've got your light and you're just looking for blazing. You're looking for, for the reflecting back. There was a section or so that there was a key place where I personally, if I was marking a course, and I used to mark courses, I would have said, I'd have put a double reflected flag right there to make sure nobody missed that key turn. Scott and I did miss it, and I think it didn't cost us too much time. It probably 5 minutes. We doubled back. It was along a riverbank, and when we got to the riverbank, I was like, whoa, this don't look familiar. I don't remember this at all.
Not supposed to be.
And then we doubled back, and then I saw it. I'm like, oh, yeah, I can see it playing perfectly from this side. But it's hard to be critical of a race director because it's so hard to mark those courses and have it maintain its integrity for the whole time. I mean, things happen. I mean, you could have had vermin or animals out there mess with them. Who knows? Stuff happens. But I will say this: Scott can get lost in a circle.
Definitely in a circle.
Well, I've got lost in a Walmart before, so I mean that shows my navigational skills. So, aside from your headlamp challenges, shall we say, when you sit down and you look back, is there anything, Scott, you think you would do differently or change if you were gonna run that race again? How would you approach it differently next time? Do you think?
I think I would probably go back and wear long tights. I had shorts on. And I was cold all night. I think I would
22 degrees.
I would probably even during the day, I wouldn't have taken them off. I'd have kept the long pants on, but I definitely wore long pants as opposed to shorts. Because, like I said, on my top, I had a compression, a hoodie sweatshirt, a quarter zip jacket over it, so my top was covered. My legs were freezing.
To go,
my legs were cold. Yep.
Yeah.
Not that would have helped the outcome or go any faster or anything like that, but as far as comfort. I changed my shoes each loop. I changed the socks each loop. The pants were the only thing. My legs were really cold. I think that's probably the only thing I would have changed. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Kurt? Looking back, what do you think you'd do differently if you're going to run that race again?
I think probably a lot of it in race was, like Scott said, it was wardrobe stuff. I don't recall ever getting too cold. I probably at one point got overheated because I had on too much. I think I would have taken my time more at the riverbed crossings and maybe invested a little more time to find a way to not get my feet wet.
Did you see others doing that? Like, was everybody just plowing through the crossing, or did you see other people? All
right, Richard, you asked, so here we go.
Yep.
So our buddy Jeremy swore if he was on here right now, he'd swear up and down. He told us. So he was one of our pacers. We got to this last crossing for Scott and I. We see no way around this. We see water and it's up to knee height. So I'm just like, we're just going through.
It's because we're old. We're not going to try and find shortcuts. We're just going through.
straight through.
We're sitting here and Jeremy's behind us. Scott and I get to the water and Jeremy's like, y'all stay there. I want to get your picture. I want to film it. And I was like, okay. Next thing I see is Jeremy flying across the side over here and he hops out like a bunny rabbit on the other side of the trail. And I'm like, where did you go? He goes, I told you guys to go left. And I'm like, huh? So, yeah. Besides that, it's funny when you don't know a trail and you do it for the first time, you don't know what you don't know. So I think if I were to do that course again, I would have said, hey, I would have wished we'd have had more time to look for ways to get around some of these nuisance water crossings, just because I know how important it is to keep your feet dry. And you know the deal. The longer you can keep those feet dry, the further down the road you can get before you have issues with blisters and what have you.
Yeah, sometimes it's unavoidable, but if it isn't unavoidable, if it is voidable, that's not even a term. But yes, if you can get around it, that would be a great thing to know in advance.
Right. Now, ask Scott this question. Scott, what would you do differently leading up to the race?
My training block for this race was not on par. I hate running in the cold. It's so easy when an alarm goes off at 5 o'clock in the morning to say, here goes 6 miles on the treadmill. I'm not going outside. So my training block got started later than I wanted it to, and was not, mileage wise, was nowhere near where I was for the Wildcat Ultra, which was this previous September. But with that being said, I finished the race and I thought I did pretty well.
Look, and Richard, this is where I wanted to bring this up for a reason, because this is, so as two people who are going to run together, you want to make sure you're matching up, right? You don't want to feel like, hey, I'm letting him down or he's letting me down. You want to make sure you match up. You're pretty doggone close. I saw Scott not training, and even Jeremy and I would talk back and forth, and he goes, he's talking to me. He's like, you're going to do fine. He goes, you have more than put in the time, the mileage. He goes, it's going to be a tough race, but you're going to get through it. Don't worry. Scott, on the other hand, I'm not so sure. So doubt laid into my mind that my partner might struggle, and I need him, right? I know that. So, wow, to my surprise, and I'll let him tell you, he, at the middle of let's say we finished the first loop, starting the second loop. So started on the second loop, right towards the end, right in the middle of that second loop. You pick up our pacers starting the third loop. When they started that loop, I couldn't keep up. I couldn't keep up with Scott. He found magic in a pair of copper knee sleeves, and he took off, and I couldn't keep up with him. And I felt, and let me tell you, for a while there, I felt like, dude, just go. You found something, just go. Yeah. I'm going to finish. But I think that's the true testament back and forth here, how we have already made the commitment when we do these things, let's stay together, because we know it's not always going to be everybody's on the same page. At some point, one will struggle, one won't. And I struggled towards the end, and he helped out a lot. And when he didn't have to stay behind.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about with the whole ebb and flow, because those kind of situations come up a lot when you're running with somebody, whether you start with them or you pick up and running with somebody during a race. There's lots of times when, one is ahead of the other, and you might just be like, yeah, you know what, you just go. I'm not feeling great. Just go on. So I think it's really cool that you guys made a commitment to stay together and started and finished together, which I think is really cool. And we got a second gear tip there, copper knee braces thrown in. So we've got two gear tips coming out of this right here.
Right. Well, Kurt, I appreciate you saying that. And look, there was no way that I was going to leave. Even if you'd have said leave, we were in that till the end together. And you know how it's hard to describe, but sometimes you let yourself down in the training, or you let yourself down in this aspect of whatever you're doing. Well, I let myself down, and I knew I did. And even going into that race, the weekend, I had no doubt in my head that I was going to finish that race, even with the lack of training. There was something on the inside that was lit, or, some people will say the demons in your head, or whatever you want to call it. I wasn't leaving without finishing that race. And even though my training for that particular race was subpar, in my head, I knew I was going to finish. I could visualize seeing myself finish.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I can't tell you how many people will come and say, okay, I've run this amount of distance in training, or I've done this amount of miles per week. Is that enough to finish? Is that enough to finish 50 mile or 100 mile? And the answer is always roughly the same, is that it's mostly mental. You can have a really good shot with almost no training.
Correct.
Like you could do a 50K with no training if that's what you want to do. But I think that's the proof right there, Scott, is that, okay, it's good to have training, but the mental side of things is really what's going to get you through and get you over the finish line ultimately. Because I think nobody's really able to train specifically for mile 65, mile 70 of a 100-mile race. You just don't know what's going to happen when you hit that point. So, I think that's really fascinating that despite a less than ideal build-up, shall we say, that you were able to get through and beat the cutoff, and 31 hours is pretty good, whichever way you look at it.
It's a long time.
And put it down to mental. It is a long time to be out there, but that just increases exponentially the mental aspect of things, right? Because it starts getting to you the more you're out there. So kudos to you guys, Now, you've mentioned Jeremy a few times. I'm sure he'll be glad for that. I think you had a crew, right? Was Jeremy a part of the crew, or so? How did if you did have a crew? How did the crew come about, and what was their role in you guys actually getting?
Oh wow,
to the
this
finish?
is all Scott's story. It's the Scott crew story. I'll let him take it away.
All right, go Scott.
Only good stuff for sure. So when we started talking about doing this race, Jeremy had mentioned he was going to be at this race and was manning an aid station. He's like, y'all come on, I'll pace y'all, we'll cook for you. So him and his girlfriend Kelly both were at the tent, and I'm telling you, every time we finished a loop, we were texting them a couple of miles out, hey, we'll be there in 2 miles, 3 miles, whatever it was. They would have hot dogs ready for us, pancakes, bacon, hamburgers, anything we needed, they were there. They were taking our shoes off, rubbing lotion or icy hot on our calves, fixing blisters, putting socks on us. They were there for everything we needed. We couldn't have asked for a better crew. On the course, the pacing part, I kind of feel like it was all over the place. Jeremy is a ball of energy. He has 2 gears. He has a stop and a go 400%. And he was at 400% that day, which was great because he kept us going and he kept us motivated. But you're also exhausted. You're in your own head. You're struggling a bit. And Jeremy is like whizzing by you and screaming stuff out. And sometimes it's overwhelming for me anyway. I don't know about anybody else. For me, it gets overwhelming for a little bit. And then on I guess it was the last loop, Kelly actually hurt herself. She actually twisted her ankle. She was pacing us as well. So our pacer, Jeremy, stayed back with Kelly and tended to her until they got her, taken care of into the aid station. So we were a good, Kurt, what would you say, 10 miles, 7 miles ahead of our pacer for a bit?
About 5 miles. Probably about 5 miles.
Yeah. But they did a great job. I'm sorry that Kelly hurt her ankle. I felt so bad for her because she was out there to help us and she wound up hurting herself. But I mean, they were there. They were our crew and they helped get us to the end for sure.
Nothing better to have crew who does these and knows what it takes to finish them.
Oh yeah.
I think they can anticipate what you may not be able to brain and comprehend what you may need. And that was big from them too.
Yep.
Being out on the course and having somebody put the time and say, hey, this is where we are. This is where you need to be. That's always helpful. Richard, you've done these things enough. You lose your mental acuity and you just get to the point where I just going to go. And where it helped the most, and believe it or not, it was kind of weird, but where they helped the most is when I fell. They weren't with us at all. At that point, that's when Scott and I were ahead of us. And so it was a comedy show if you'd have been out there. Because like I said, we went through the dynamics here of our differences. 210, dead weight, in a riverbed, 140 pounds. I'm going to pick you up. So we know we're killing time, right? And we know we're the aid stations had cutoffs, Richard. So it wasn't just you did have to hit certain aid stations at a certain time to continue on. So we got to a point, we're sitting there, and then Jeremy showed back up. And when he showed back up, I was like, I think we're about to be in time trouble. And sure enough, Jeremy helped me out of the riverbed, and that's when things got real serious on time. They were, I think at that point, even though all of the stuff leading up to that was the part there where they got us back. Well, me, Scott was along for the ride at that point for the show, for the comedy show, got us back on track. Hey, Kurt, you don't have time to stop at this aid station. I'm going to grab some stuff for you. Hopefully I get what you need, but you don't have time to stop. We got to keep running. You actually have to run now, figure out how to run. That was good to have them. Now, so I was hoping he was going to go into the whole story on Jeremy and how they met and how that all went down. So Scott and I signed up. I don't know, this is probably 2 years ago. I think it was in 2022. Scott came in town. It was that same race that I did the 100 at. I've done every distance out there, but I hadn't done the 50K. So I had a goal time out there, 6 hours or less, and I hit my goal time. But Scott met Jeremy at that race, and Jeremy was doing the 100-miler out there. And so I think, Scott, how far did you run with Jeremy?
We did probably 16 miles. We did Levy there and back.
16 miles, Richard. So he met this guy for, 2 hours? 3 hours? 3 hours, Richard. He meets him. Next thing I know, for Wildcat, this dude's come and stay at his house. He's never met him before except for a 3-hour race on a trail. I'm like, this dude could be an axe murderer.
Yeah. That's always been one of the amazing things about racing, trail racing, ultra racing. It's such a tight-knit community. And I've said, like, you can spend a couple of hours with somebody on a trail and get to know them in a way that you would never get to know them if you were just going to meet them out in a park or somewhere else. Like, people's walls come down really quickly when with all the stress and the tension and the trauma of being out on these long runs. I think there's something about that where your guard drops and you just unload and you end up with these really, really close bonds with people you may only spend a few hours with. And I know I have the same experience with people I meet, but I think that's really interesting, a really fun part of trail running.
Yep. I think you get so vulnerable out there. You know, you have nothing, you can't hide anything at that point. You're an open book, and who you are is who you're going to be, because you don't have any emotion. You don't have any place to hide it. So you're very vulnerable, and you get to know somebody in that short amount of time. Jeremy happened to go, I'm a lot older than he is, but he happened to go to the same high school I did. He grew up in the same town I did. So there was a little bit of a connection there that kind of built some trust. You know, we kind of knew the same roots or grew up in the same roots. So 3 hours being vulnerable on the course, and you really get to know somebody. And I've built a few friendships on the course like that. Yep.
Yeah. The emotional side of running, and I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast previously, but nobody really prepares you, I don't think, for the emotional side of these races. When you get north of 100 miles, you can do all the physical training and you can do all the logistical stuff up front, but it's a proper roller coaster out there. But it gets like I was my last race, I think the day 3 of the 200 race I was doing, I was just crying for no reason whatsoever. And it's not like just anything anyone said to me, I would just be bawling for some reason, and I had no control over it. But just, the emotional side of things is something people don't really talk about too much, but it's there on every one of these races, and it'll get you. But I do think you're right. That has a part to play in everybody being very open and genuine, because you get the real person there on the trail, right? There's no hiding anything when you're 60, 70 miles into a race and freezing cold and your feet are wet. And, there's no hiding anything when you're at that point. So we talked about recovery a little bit out of the gate at the beginning of the episode here, and I hope you don't mind, but I'm right there too as 50 plus runners. I was curious how you guys approach recovery after a big old event like this, 100 miles. What do you do afterwards? Is it active recovery?
Kurt, you want to start?
How do you approach that?
I'm gonna tell you, it's active when you can be. I think probably didn't do anything, Richard, for probably a week after this race. And I mean, at some point, sometimes it's just a struggle to get out of bed and walk to the shower, et cetera. But once you get that lactic acid flushed out and you start to feel a little bit rickety as you are, that's when I get propped up. And when I mean propped up, if I'm going to go out and try to go do something, part of that recovery is to be smart. And maybe now going forward, I'm going to start wearing the knee braces deeper into a race, just because it protects the form of the joint. But I think I was in knee sleeves, knee braces, ankle sleeves, braces, whatever you want to call them, compression things, probably for the first 4 weeks while I was doing any kind of running, just to be on the safe side. I did continuously I've got one of those Thera thumper things, and I was always making sure I was hitting the hot spots daily and stretching as much as I can. I'm not very flexible at all, but just trying to do some stretching, and then just body position strengthening, meaning sitting in, squat positions, anything that builds those muscles back up, the hip flexors. I do incorporate. I used to play a lot of golf, so I'll get my long weighted sticks out, and I do hip exercises to keep the hip flexors flexible. I think that's a big part, especially as we get older. You got to be fluid down there, especially when you're running terrain. that's rough to make sure you can bob and weave. So I try to just keep everything fluid, but I'm careful and smart. Like I said, the knee braces just came off probably 2 weeks ago.
I think that's good stuff. The joints, especially the hip flexors and, hip joints for me are a big problem too. Just after all the pounding, it's no good these days. How about you, Scott?
I'm kind of the same as Kurt. I usually take for sure a couple of days off. Maybe that third day, if I'm able to walk on the treadmill, I'll walk really slow. Just depends on what kind of shape the body is in. I'm a big believer in rehab tools. So like Kurt said, the massage gun, the foam rollers, rolling. I also have a pair of those compression boots, the ones that zip up, and it's like a kind of a blood pressure cuff all up and down your leg. It kind of does it in increments. Yeah. Huge believer in those. I do those usually once a day. Right after the race, I try to do them twice a day. I think getting that blood flowing in there helps to get some of that lactic acid out. But like Kurt said, just trying to move. And as hard as it is and as sore as you are, just trying to keep the blood flowing through the legs. And that's any kind of movement, walking down the block, the treadmill. After this red dirt, I did have some knee pain, so I was out a little bit longer than I wanted to. Once I was able to get back on the treadmill, I still had a little bit of knee pain. Just kind of walked through that, and Kurt will vouch for it. I texted him and Jeremy April, or I guess the end of March, and I said, doesn't matter how bad it hurts, April 1st, I'm on the road, and it's been 2 weeks, and the knee pain is actually gone now. So I don't know if getting on the road and getting active again has worked all that lactic acid out, but it actually feels good now. So,
Yeah. Motion is lotion,
yes,
as the saying goes, right?
Yep.
Get out there, and it doesn't matter if it's fast or slow, just get it moving and get the blood flow going.
And the older we get, we're all right around the same age. I'm 51. It seems like you could wake up after a great night of sleep and something aches. You don't know how it was. You don't know what happened. But so every morning I wake up or every night I go to bed, it's like, all right, what's tomorrow going to feel like at 5 a.m.,
Yes, I don't know that, and that's really why I asked, because I'm kind of right around 50, and I'm like, dude, this is way different than when I was 30, 35 running or 20 years running and just bounce back out again.
Yeah.
It's really different, and I have to be really mindful of what I'm doing before, during, and after a race, because it's very different. It's a very different
Pay attention.
Maybe I'll do a specific episode on 50-plus runners and strategies and techniques for staying flexible and kind of build up and post races, because that might be interesting too.
Some of those sumo squats.
Underserved. Yeah. I tell you, man, if I could do a bunch of those, probably I have to hold on to stuff. And
that opens those hip flexors up really good, though. That's for sure.
I fall over backwards. So I have to hold on to something to do.
It's all right with cheating. Cheating's fine.
Yes, it is a little cheating, I have to say. So the listener base for Choose to Endure is predominantly back of the pack folks, or the tail end of the ultra world. Now, do you guys have any advice for those folks, especially in sort of preparing for and tackling ultra distances in general, or specifically for stepping up to like 100, like you guys just did, if they are sort of on the fence about wanting to give it a try?
I hear a lot of people, at the gym I talk to, or just around town as I'm running and they're walking past or whatever. They're like, man, there's no way I could do a long run like that. There's no way. They've already lost the battle. They've already got it in their head that they can't do it. I feel like what we do, there's no magic to it. I'm not fast. Kurt's not fast. Jeremy is fast. We're not fast. We'll walk a little bit. We'll run a little bit. We'll walk a little bit. We'll run a little bit. But we have it down to a science to where we know when the timer clicks, it's time to run. When the timer clicks again, we're going to walk for a bit. Anybody can do that. Yeah. Start small. So, start with a 5K, finish the 5K and stay at that distance for a few months. And, then you get the urge, you get motivated. You're like, man, that 5K felt great. Let me sign up for a 10K. Just keep the momentum going. Don't tell yourself you can't do it, because, trust me, if I can do it, anybody can do it. But just stick with it. And 100 miles is far. You don't have to start with 100 miles. Start with a 50K and do a walk-run method. Do a walk 2 minutes and run in 5 minutes. There's all kind of increments you can do, and they're all going to get you to the same finish line.
Kurt, how about you?
Wow. We're asked this all the time. I do. People at work and stuff ask all the time. And my answer is always the same. You can't do it unless you have a strong why you want to do it. So I always tell people it's a physical race till about mile 30. Then after that, it's mental. So these folks who run half marathons and stuff like that, they always tell me, "Oh, I couldn't do any of that stuff." And I said, "Well, you just haven't found a strong enough why that you want to do it." That's always been my thing. I started doing triathlons and marathons and all that, and I did a full Ironman. And when I got into doing this, I made attempts, and those attempts were fails, right? And I don't look at a fail as just oh my gosh, you failed, you so bad, don't do it again. We learn from every failure. I think I learned a lot of stuff every time I do fail. So one of the things I tell people is go out and fail. Go out and, oh, Kurt, I can't run 12, 13 miles. Go out and go try to run 15 and fail trying to do it. Mm-hmm. You'll get better from it. If you want to do something like this, then there is more than enough people that will rally around you and help you. Case in point, This last race, Scott and I caught up with this guy. His name was Rylan, and Rylan is a veteran, and he was injured. He was injured in battle. Guy jumped out of a helicopter, lost his lead rope, and fell down about 8 feet, flat on his back. I think he told us he had like 12 bad discs or something like that. But this guy was out there he was out there doing the 50K. And, we tell him a little bit about ourselves and that we do these things together, this, that, and the other. And he was just, he was enamored by it. And he reached out and we talked and we friended each other and everything. And we started talking about the next race, right? And I always say the end of each race is the beginning of the next one. And we started talking to him about doing Wildcat and said, hey, look, this race, Wildcat, it's a 2.5 mile loop, and you do it 40 times. Okay. Everything is right there for you. You're not going to be far from people ever. You're going to have people with you the whole way. I'm like, heck, I'm doing it. Scott's doing it. We're going to be out there. He signed up for it. The guy's why is beyond measure. Just going through his Facebook stuff, his life that he's going through, the dude's got some whys. So I know if he can overcome that physical piece of it, the dude's mentally strong. So for him, it's a little different. So he was just like looking for somebody to say, can you carry me along or pull me along on the physical? I've already got the mental. That person's there. The other one that's hard to get around is the guy who thinks they have the physical, but they didn't have all the why. That was me last year. At that Wildcat race.
Yeah, the mental side of it is so important. Like we were talking about earlier, like you can have all the physical tools. You can be a super fast guy, but you don't know you until you get past 35, 40 miles, and
you find out real quick.
Then you really find out, right? Who I'm at. So fantastic. Yeah, I think too. When I talk to people and I'm like, I'm doing a 100-miler or a 50-miler or a 200-miler, I think they, in their head, they equate that with kind of like a half marathon pace, and that I'm out there doing this half marathon pace for 100 miles, and they go, I could never do that. And I'm like, well, me neither. That's I didn't do that either. There's a whole lot of walking involved, and and I stop to eat, and I drink a beer every 50 miles. So like, what do you want to do? So I think people immediately close their mind to the concept that people do this kind of thing,
and it's okay to walk. And so a lot of people think you have to run the whole way, or you're running the whole way. It's okay to walk. There's no shame in that.
No, not at all. It's encouraged, actually. Especially when you get out on the hillier sections. Definitely encouraged. Do what you got to do. Just
aren't they all hilly?
Finish.
Same finish line for everybody.
Aren't they all hilly?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Some of them, no, most of them actually, yes. So to the big question of the episode, thinking back on Red Dirt, is that a race that you guys would recommend to other back of the packers out there? And if so, or even if not, why?
Well, I think
so. I'll start with this, Kurt. Unfortunately, this was the last year for the 100-miler at that race, so that's not an option.
Oh man,
they're only going to do the 50K and the 50-miler. My thought, that was a tough course. That was a tough course. More tougher than I expected for sure. I think I underestimated that course. I don't know that I would go back and do it. Mm-hmm. Maybe the 50K I would encourage someone to go do, but 100-mile on that course for a back of the packer is kind of tough. That's my thought. So.
Yeah, no, fair.
Yep.
That's why we ask. I mean, part of this is to get stuff out there for other folks.
I echo that. It was definitely more technical than I thought it was going to be. There was never really too many spots, Richard, where you could just zone out and go. You always had to, always had to be thinking, looking, making sure you weren't stepping in a rut on a route. It was hands on the knees for some of it, going uphill. And then it was, for me, you can bleep this out, my oh shits on the way down the hills when my quads are killing me every step down. Now, would I go back out there just to do a 50K? Probably so. Knowing that the end is coming sooner, knowing you only got to go through it once. It's gorgeous up there, Richard. One of the things I love about Ultra is, and Jeremy went and did a race this weekend. I can't remember the name of it, Chief Ladija or something like that in northern Alabama. And one of the things about it is I said, just go and enjoy the silence. Sometimes it's just about enjoying the silence and the nature and where you are and how gorgeous it is. That place was beautiful. And I can't tell you how many times I said to myself, I wish I wasn't out here killing myself for 100 miles. I wish I was just out here camping. Yeah. It is gorgeous out here. So I've gotten to experience things out there that I would have never experienced otherwise. So beautiful place for sure. I mean, you're talking 50, 80, 100-foot pines everywhere, thick as thieves. And it's just a beautiful place. Single track trails. It's a good venue. It's in the middle of nowhere, Louisiana. So you don't have any cell phone service out there, but that's kind of good sometimes too, though.
Yeah. Just get away from it for a bit. Nobody can get you. I like it. Well, I think that's fair. And that's why we asked the question, right? Because we're trying to provide information for folks listening who may or may not have heard of this race, and we're out there looking for it. So I think that's fair.
Yep.
Now, another thing we do each episode is to encourage guests to choose a song to add to the free Spotify Choose to Endure playlist. Typically, it's something family friendly, if I can get the words out, that would motivate you, kind of keep you moving while you're out on the trail there. Now, if you would, what did you guys choose to add, and why does it resonate with you? And I'll start with Scott. What was your choice, Scott?
I think my song was "The Phoenix" by the Fall Out Boys. And it's a very upbeat, and it's a motivational, upbeat, fast. And when you're, when I'm out running in the morning and I hear it come on, it's almost like I automatically feel my pace pick up just a little bit, or feel a pep in my step come. So good song. If you haven't heard it, really good song. Put it on your playlist.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to add it. So yeah, I did listen to it. It was pretty good. It's pretty upbeat. And then Kurt, your choice was Whatever It Takes, Imagine Dragons.
I'm sure you've never listened to that one, have you?
My son is a huge Imagine Dragons fan. He's 10 years old, and my wife took him to his first concert, which was Imagine Dragons. So yes, I am somewhat familiar with that song, but why does it resonate with you as a running song, or a song you would put on to run to?
Like we already talked about, that there is a big mental aspect to doing ultra, but there's also a huge, you got to get pumped up. You gotta go to a place sometimes that it's just guttural. And that song, Whatever It Takes, I love the adrenaline in my veins. There's just something about it. Now, that's just, when you ask for a song, there were so many that I listened to. I kind of do different things with music. I equate the music I listen to the movies I watch. So I have a lot of music scores on my playlist from movies. And so if you ever want to hear some very dramatic scores, Dark Tower has some most dramatic, it's those things where you can, there's no words to the music. So it allows you in your brain just to go wherever you want to go and have that music hype you up. How does it help when you've seen the scenes in the movie that equate to that music. And it's those battle scenes. And when you see those things, then it just feels like I'm out there and nothing's going to stop me. It's like, it's just me and the trail, and it's the next step.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. When I was a kid growing up, I used to watch the Rocky movies, and so anytime I hear the trumpet sounds at the beginning of the training montage, you don't have to have a word of that song, or just play the tune,
and it brings you right there. It brings you right there.
Yeah, your mind goes to it. But yeah, really cool. Very cool. Well, I appreciate you picking some songs, and we will definitely get those added to the playlist so that folks out there can enjoy those tunes as much as you both do. Kurt, Scott, thank you so much again for joining us today. I really hope their Red Dirt Louisiana adventure might have encouraged you listeners to get over to the Ultra Sign Up website. Maybe consider signing up for either the 50K or the 50 mile now that there is no 100 mile left out there in backwoods Louisiana. I'm sure they do some good food. Knowing Louisiana as we do, we have a lot of family over in South Louisiana, so I'm sure they put on a good spread at the aid stations as well. While you're out there on the internet checking out Red Dirt and maybe even Wildcat Ultras, which is where the guys are headed to together next, don't forget to subscribe to the show and get notified each time a new episode comes out. And of course, share, follow, and maybe even consider taking 2 minutes to give the show a review over there on Apple Podcasts. It would be very much appreciated. Doing any of those things really does help with the algorithms, and that in turn helps get the word out, helps other runners find the information that guests like Kurt and Scott have to share. You can find us on Instagram and on Facebook and at choosetoendure.com. Be sure to head over to any of those, check us out, say hello, or drop us a message, suggest a topic, or provide some constructive feedback if you have a moment. We really do love getting those interactions. So until then, run long, run strong, and keep choosing to endure.
Thanks for running with us at the Choose to Endure podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. We had a blast. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. Keep racking up the miles and the stories, and we'll catch you at the next trailhead. Until then, remember to run long, run strong.